automatic control quality tool system. Unit 1. European Quality Assurance in Vocational Education and Training and European Quality Assurance Reference Framework. Basic facts. Quality assurance models and standards. The client system. One way to ensure the quality of vocational training is to submit it constantly to the judgment of its client system. We are deliberately talking about client system because the training services do not have a single recipient. The slides provide a detailed statement of the client system, taken as a whole and divided into 4 major categories. User, beneficiary of the learning process, namely a natural person. Commissioner, the entity that asks training providers to deliver a certain level of training that will benefit both companies and individuals. Financing body, local, regional, national and community institutions that after issuance of public call for proposals co-finance the implementation of measures aimed at vocational training. Promoters or validators, internal figures to the social partners who work for the promotion and validation of projects for vocational training. Each component of the client system emphasizes a particular aspect of the overall concept of quality. In a competitive logic of the market, training providers give themselves the objective of reaching a standard satisfaction index of their services, which tend to achieve top ratings by all their client system. The process system. An approach to quality assurance of vocational training much adopted by training providers is focused on ensuring the quality of processes. Given the difficulties in delivering services, in order to measure the quality of the products, it is preferred to focus on the quality of the processes that make the training products or services. The system processes illustrated in this slide proposes once again, with the appropriate customizations, the model based on the ISO 9001 regulations, which is internationally recognized and is composed of 4 areas. Organizational management processes, resources management processes, implementation processes, measurement analysis and improvement processes. Focusing on the implementation processes, a further element of distinction is the coexistence of key processes, namely those related to the realization of products or services, with support processes, that is, the processes that do not contribute directly to the creation of the end result, but are necessary for each achievement. The key processes have been identified as follows: skill needs analysis and preparation of the offer or tender, design, provision, evaluation, validation and certification of skills. Support processes, as highlighted by the slide, are transversely affecting the other processes, in various phases and at different times of their development. The Quality Manual, which formalizes and makes transparent the procedures for managing processes and the responsibilities of all actors involved, defines the process's quality standards. The model is generally shared, and many are implementing it as a preferred approach for quality assurance also in vocational training. The product system. Quality assurance in vocational training can be centered directly on the quality of the product or service provided. The product of a quality-oriented learning process is represented by the learning outcomes. As one can see in the slide, the final product is supported by the training pathway, in turn segmented into plans, analysis, courses and modules, services, that is acceptance, mentoring and guidance, support ensured through the learning objects and media. The slide shows the centrality of learning outcomes. Safeguarding the quality of learning outcomes ensures the quality and responsiveness of a training project to the real needs of the learning users for training products or services, including the learner's physical comfort obtained through the adequacy and quality of the host structure. One particularly important aspect is that learning outcomes must be clear, achievable, measurable, and appropriate for the entire client system. They must also be immediately transferable to the contexts in which users perform professional tasks. The standards of learning outcomes are formalized in the directories of standards for the issuance of qualifications. Each country of the European Union needs to introduce these standards into these directories and must reference them to the 8 levels defined in the European Device for Qualification. The stakeholder system. In a constructivist approach to quality and vocational training, the accountability of all the players involved is determining. A training project built and operated in a well-thought-out process of governance is an added value for all parties involved if they contribute to feed it, thus growing far beyond the expected results through a virtuous cycle participation. As you can see on the slide, there are 6 types of actors involved in the training process. The shared roles of each stakeholder are the following. Enterprises or organizations. They are private companies and or public entities that benefit from the outcomes of the provided training. Public bodies. They represent all those entities present in the territory of reference involved with various roles in the planning, management and implementation of strategies and policies in the field of the training and employment. Employment agencies. They are territorial authorities responsible for the matching between the demand and supply of skills. Accredited organizations that certify competencies. Competent authorities at national or regional level that are in charge of the certification of professional competencies. Training providers. They are represented by training agencies, consulting firms and companies. Social partners. This category contains associations and trade unions. The category also includes bilateral organizations that provide technical assistance in the design of concrete training plans through the involvement of the different actors. Memoranda of Understanding signed between the stakeholders themselves contain standards of cooperations that are defined and formalized in. The system of the professionals involved. The quality of products or services of professional training, the quality of the processes that make them, is necessarily mediated by the quality of the professionals working within the structures that provide training. The slide indicates a type of professionals deemed essential in order to ensure the key processes of the educational structure, those that guarantee the effectiveness of the services provided. It is important that these figures be defined by professional standards, which establish the skills and define the levels of mastery of the skills required of them. Based on these standards, as a guarantee of the quality of these professionals, it could be appropriate for their skills to be certified by accredited bodies for the certification of skills. Multidimensional approach to quality. The slide illustrates the opportunity for a multidimensional approach to the quality of vocational training. Quality assurance in the activities of vocational training has to be pursued with a multidimensional approach by all the parties interested in the learning outcomes, which today constitute the strategic factor for the development of both individuals and businesses and territories, especially in the service sectors, such as tourism. The slide illustrates an overall picture of the dimensions considered essential for effective quality assurance in education. The quality of learning outcomes. To ensure the quality of the delivered training product is the first but indispensable step to guarantee adequate levels of quality and meet the real educational needs of the service users themselves. The quality of processes. The majority of training providers felt that in order to have a training product meet certain standards, it is necessary to define and share management methods applied from the needs analysis all through the design, delivery, monitoring, and subsequent evaluation phases. The government processes guarantee the training product learning outcomes identified and well defined through the detection of measurable and quantifiable indicators. The quality of training providers. This dimension oversees quality assurance of the operational headquarters and training delivery requirements in terms of safety and didactic adequacy with respect to the learning objectives to be achieved through different training pathways. Human resources quality. Nowadays, the government of the processes and the quality of the training product are pursued mainly using operators that possess the appropriate skills that have been identified, possibly trained and made transparent through the certification. Basics of the quality management. A widespread quality and assessment culture are necessary to the foundation of quality management. The quality culture takes on a meaning that moves to the logic of continuous improvement, in which different actors involved assume priority. This approach is contrary to traditional concepts of quality assurance, whose focus was primarily on the conformity of the product or service to the requirements defined by the client. Thus, the centrality of human capital and its appropriation of a culture of quality improvement are clearly stated. The alignment with the European directives on the subject of quality assurance of learning systems and the logic of improving the quality itself also imply the need of all actors involved to move towards attitudes, motivations, values, and behaviors deemed to constantly improve training strategies, learning outcomes, the ability to meet the needs of internal and external customers and stakeholders. This implies that all organizations, regardless of the level to which they refer, should monitor the capacity of the entire organization to produce adequate performance and meet the implicit or explicit needs as well as the requirements of the customer system. In vocational training, the methodologies, operational tools, procedures, and mechanisms associated with them, and in general all practices of quality assurance, work only if there is a widespread culture of quality that passes necessarily through the competencies of the professionals working in this field and through those of the various stakeholders. We do not want to run into the same mistakes or missteps made in the past, when organizations providing services had begun to approach the world of quality assurance by adopting tools, methodologies, practices typical of the industrial world. Consequently, it is clear that in learning systems, where the result is obtained through the interaction between customer and provided, the characteristics in terms of skills, experience, culture, and values of human resources play a major role. Human resources operating in vocational training are more and more required to have embraced a culture of quality that relies on methods, indicators, tools, and at the same time to surpass them in order to arrive at a more comprehensive approach that incorporates crucial evolutionary moments that regard quality over time. That is, the quality of the product or service, the quality of processes, and the system quality. Activity areas of VET professionals. In order to play their pivotal role in developing a culture of quality as continuous improvement, VET professionals have to operate as shown in the slide on two dimensions. A strategic dimension, which in turn includes two areas of expertise: networking and the development of human resources and quality assurance. An operational dimension, which in turn contains two areas of expertise: administration and training. In general, the importance of the typically strategic dimension, which highlights the need to develop skills related to the ability to network, both inside and outside, is clear. It is also clear that the dimension regarding the development of human resources and quality assurance plays a very significant role. The assessment culture. We talk of hetero-assessment when assessment, which may be targeted to the acquired skills, the training product or program, or even the training organization, is carried out by third parties. These are external and independent organizations. We can talk even more rigorously about hetero-assessments when during an assessment activity, organizations or individuals outside the organization control the choice of the approach, criteria and indicators, the construction of data collection instruments, and their administration. The hetero-assessment, therefore, answers the need for objectivity of judgment. You can then distinguish two types of hetero-assessments. Second party, if carried out by the organization's customers or by other actors delegated by the customer, and third party, if carried out by external and independent accredited organizations. Since hetero-assessment activities were often perceived as inspection, peer review and benchmarking initiatives have spread steadily and internationally. While benchmarking practices have a more or less consolidated tradition based on the Codex of Reference, peer review practices seem to be less structured but better accepted internationally. Self-assessment is characterized by the fact that the person who is evaluated masters the management of this system. It can be defined as a first-party evaluation, as it is conducted for internal purposes by the organization itself or by others on their behalf. Therefore, self-assessment can represent a resource, a tool to get to know one's self, to learn collectively, to discover one's strengths and weaknesses, and to take decisions that lead to functional improvement. Guiding principles. The assessment should not be seen as an end in itself, intended to produce a more or less interesting final report. Assessment must be a critical component of the strategic management process of the overall structure. It must represent a point of reference for the initial definition of the objectives to be achieved, which must be done based on the analysis of the strengths and weaknesses, but also based on new strategies the organization intends to implement. Finally, it has to be a reference point for verifying their accomplishment. Internal assessment guarantees the involvement of the organization's employees, which is essential to trigger the process of continuous improvement. External assessment is indispensable for the objectivity of judgment. In the absence of external parties, for instance, inspectors, consultants, observers, that can ensure the latter, it is necessary to anchor the internal assessment to as objective as possible indicators, allowing the comparison of the performance of the organization to those of other organizations or to regional or national indicators, thus avoiding the risks of a mainly self-referenced analysis. The assessment is also not to be seen as an exercise to be carried out episodically, driven by some contingent factor, but it must represent a permanent cross-organizational activity for which spatial organization, equipment, and adequate resources shall be provided. Guiding principles. In addition to the preparation of survey instruments, such as questionnaires, tests, grids for direct observation, grids for qualitative analysis, assessment requires the creation of databases. The use of the various instruments must be interconnected within a unitary scheme for the collection and classification of information. The research and international and national experience highlight the need not to stop at collecting information on the final product, but to take into account all the resources, either human, material, technological, or financial, that have been dedicated to it. The assessment process must be legitimate and supported by the organization's management. Furthermore, the results should be shared by all internal resources and made public outside the organization to illustrate the achieved performance to families, societal stakeholders, and the community. Finally, we must clearly distinguish the roles of those who manage the assessment process and those who manage the organization. Product quality, service quality. Product quality and service quality. The current markets are characterized by slower economic growth and at the same time by the increasing importance of the quality of the product as a distinguishing and competitive factor. Companies are mainly focused on the goal of quality in order to introduce these market products that, simply put, sell. The problem is that the concept of quality has strongly evolved, and the consumer demands products that must not only meet the reason for which they were created, but also respond to the consumer's new needs, such as environmental friendliness, recyclability, and low consumption. The product, furthermore, must be durable, easy to use, and maintained by the customer. But before defining what is meant by the quality of the product, it should be an additional step to define exactly what is meant by the quality of product and quality of service, even if ultimately there is only one definition of quality. The meaning of the term quality can be explained by thinking of the relationship between what the customer expects and how much the purchased product or service satisfies that. Consequently, the quality does not grow separate from the product performance. It takes the maximum value when these benefits coincide with the user's expectations. The quality is subjective to the customers. Two different customers should receive the same level of quality in the same product, otherwise different customers would perceive different quality levels. The quality of a product or service is not static, but dynamic. It evolves with the evolution of markets and consumer expectations. Product quality. When we talk about the quality of a product, we usually refer to the industrial quality of the product itself, that is, to its physical and chemical properties. For example, in the case of a dishwasher, its quality is represented by the level of cleanliness that it is able to ensure to the dishes, soundproofing, low fuel consumption of electricity, and more. Product quality is defined as grouping of the qualities that characterize the suitability of the product for a specific use. To establish whether a product is of certain quality or not, you have to consider its ability to perform or not the functions for which it was designed. The consumer does not buy a dishwasher, but the concept of washing pots. So even in the case of physical products, you have to start with the needs of the consumer. There are, however, various minimum elements that must be present and guaranteed in all products. Number 1. A reasonable price that is coherent and representative of the relative value that consumers assign to the concept of the product. Number 2. Cost. Number 3. Durability. The ability to resist over time to the stresses and ensure a constant operation. Number 4. Security. It can be understood as safety for the user, but also in the interests of certainty of the result you can reach with the use of the goods. Number 5. Ease of use. A few instructions, clear, simple, easy to understand, and with a guide to the different situations that may occur. Number 6. Simplicity of manufacture. That does not mean a decrease in performance, but rather includes innovations in order to be attractive for the market. Number 7. Easy removal. There is always a greater awareness of green and environmental care. Although many consumers do not seem to be particularly sensitive to this issue, in time it will assume an increasingly important role. Now, Number 8. A product that does not have any of the foregoing quality elements is inferior or defective. These elements, therefore, take the name of negative quality factors. On the contrary, however, the fact that a product possesses all the elements mentioned above does not ensure that the product will be able to win the competition. In addition to the factors we saw in the previous slide, there are other elements called positive quality factors in order for the product in question to be a winner. Number 1. Valid design, a distinctive element that combines design with functionality. Number 2. Superiority compared to the competition. The best one is taken as a reference to indicate the excellent. Number 3. Attractiveness, aesthetics, capable of winning attraction. Beauty is subjective and is the result of personal counting, but it is also true that beauty is a widely recognizable element. Number 4. Originality, as an expression of a distinctive element that breaks the mold while being functional. These elements take the name of factors of positive quality and, as is evident, are subjective and individual views. The product quality must therefore be defined as evidence of the advantages that it is able to offer to the consumer. The steps required for the development of a new product are the following: analysis and understanding of customer needs. As the expression goes, there are no inventors of products, but only discoverers of needs. Design specifications. How much designers are able to understand the consumer's needs and make the concept of the product physically perceptible. Component features. The final quality is the sum of the contribution of individual components. Manufacturing operations. Simple actions in which human resources can exercise professional skills. Manufacturer specifications. Clarity, simplicity, and ease of executing manufacturing specifications. The proper implementation of these steps leads to the creation of a product that, as expected, should meet customer satisfaction. Service quality. Services differ from physical products because their consumption does not occur at a specific time, but occurs in a process that includes several steps further. The services usually use material goods as necessary supports to production, but the quality of the result depends on the use of these supports involved in the production. Other features are that services are not storable and consumption and production usually coincide. The quality of service stems from a continuing relationship between the producer and the consumer. This report concerns all stages of development of a service, from the design up to the time of exit of the service. Quality is measured by the ability to make a positive memory of the service that the consumer has used. Start. This is the time of design. The services are designed like an industrial product. The most important part concerns the organization, goods and materials needed for the production, and human resources will have to face with the consumer. The consumer is not physically present, but he is still the target. Contact. It's the communication process with which a producer informs the market that he is able to meet certain needs and desires. This is when the consumption of the service begins. Nowadays, thanks to the information, the consumer becomes aware of how he may use the service. Arrival. It's the time when a consumer approaches the physical place of use of the service. He becomes aware of material elements that surround and judges whether their expectations can be fulfilled. Welcome. This step is repeated continuously during the productive process. The first moment of acceptance is when you make the initial contact, even by electronic media, between consumer and producer. The welcome is a moment of truth in which the consumer gets the first impression of the place, staff, and equipment, and this first impression will affect all future production times. Purchase, consumption. Two steps which usually coincide and that are repeated many times during the production and consumption process. Output. It's the last possibility of physical relationship between the producer and the consumer. At this moment, the consumer recounts the entire production process and becomes aware of the value of what he has been able to take advantage of. It's often the time of payment of the price of the service purchased, and then consumers can be more accurate in determining the quality levels of individual satisfaction. Customer satisfaction is gained by the ability to meet consumer expectations. Expectations that the manufacturer has helped create through its own communication to the markets. There is talk now experiences and emotions felt during the delivery of the service. If the process was carried out in a manner consistent to the expectations, perceived quality will be positive. Otherwise, we will have a level of customer dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction is greater if mistakes are made in the production of the service. Each step corresponds to a different definition of production quality. On the side of the producer, we will have in fact a quality designed at the start of a process, an announced quality to the time of contact, and a quality actually created, and an output of the time of reception to exit the production process. On the client's side instead, we will have an expected quality that arises for the communication of the producer and the interpretation that the consumer creates against the need to satisfy his desires. Measurement of quality. The measurement is made in 5 areas. Tangible aspects intended as a judgment on the quality of aesthetic and functional components of perceivable aspects that make up the service and are related to the physical facilities, equipment, personnel, communication of tools. Reliability judgment about the ability of the company offering the service to provide services in a reliable and precise way. This area is made up of items that investigate the correct meaning in both form and substance. Ability to answer the judgment of the user's ability to provide a support function to facilitate the relationship between operators and users investigated. Ability of reassurance, which investigates the ability of staff to convey safety in performing customers' transactions. Empathy. The ability of the enterprise to provide personalized service capable of meeting the real needs of each customer in its specificity and individuality. Quality assurance in VET. Centrality of learning outcomes. Quality assurance in VET has as its theme a sequence of centrality. The first is the centrality of learning outcomes. The first element that must guide the process of quality assurance in VET is the recognition of the importance and value in terms of exchange value of learning outcomes. Now we can try to interpret the meaning that Europe gives to this important concept. In the recommendation of the European Parliament and of the Council of the 23rd of April 2008 on the creation of the European Qualifications Framework for Lifelong Learning, the learning outcomes are intended as the description of what a learner knows, understands, and is able to do on completion of a learning process. Results are defined in terms of knowledge, skills, and competence. We should emphasize that the expression refers to the results actually demonstrated, observed, documented, and not simply expected. The term student should not be interpreted as the person learning. Compared to the traditional approach, which emphasizes learning inputs, attention has shifted on the results and necessarily in all contexts that can provide opportunities, the incentives and supports for the learning. The learning outcomes approach involves a substantial change in the paradigm teaching, learning. The previous paradigm, based on teaching, put the emphasis on the acquisition and transmission of explicit knowledge. The paradigm, based on learning, however, stresses the fact that learning is always a process of building knowledge and reality, whose main protagonist is the learner. Learning outcomes approach, learner centrality. The slide graphically illustrates how the person learning is the center around which the learning outcomes have developed, followed by the assessment and training strategies. The most important aspect of the learning outcomes approach is that all the traditional components of the training design should be planned having in mind the person that learns. Hence, it starts with the definition of the learning outcomes, choosing therefore consistent assessment strategies and then developing training strategies. The diagram shows that the quality assurance crosses all activities for the purpose of ensuring the person's acquisition of the learning outcomes. that he is committed to acquire. Taking the learning outcomes approach does not mean joining a simple model of formalization of learning aimed only at ensuring transparency, but it means first of all examining the impacts and the level of innovation that this approach conveys. The definition of learning outcomes provided by the EQAVET recommendation states that these are described in terms of knowledge, skills and competencies. A question remains open. Should these knowledge, skills and competencies be interpreted as three dimensions always present in a learning outcome, which integrates and makes possible their joint demonstration, or should they be considered three different separate categories of learning outcomes? According to the model proposed in European documents, the three categories of learning outcomes are placed on the same level, even juxtaposed according to some. Hence, it leads to the fear that there is a weak defense of the unity of the learning process and, consequently, an equally weak attention to the subject's ability to act effectively in an environment combining the personal resources and providing effective performance. According to the reference model in some countries, however, there is a hierarchy of learning outcomes. The main consists of skills, each of which requires the mobilization and effective combination of other learning outcomes. The subject must have achieved and demonstrated knowledge, skills, and other personal resources. The centrality of learning outcomes certification processes, a conceptual map. The shift to learning outcomes implies a renewed attention to the processes of certification. It will then be necessary to clarify what this means and how these processes are understood in more recent European documents. We will do so starting from the definition of qualification. The definition of qualification reads: qualification, a formal outcome of an assessment and validation process which is obtained when a competent body determines that an individual has achieved learning outcomes to definite standards. The term qualification is always a source of problems because there has always been a bit of confusion between qualification understood as something that a qualified person has in order to do a job and qualification understood as something that a person with a certificate has. To sum up, the recommendation EQF defines the concept of qualification as the various documents issued by public and private bodies with the consent of national and local authorities. These documents prove the achievement of certain acquisitions related to the defined standards and based on a verification made within a specific certification system. The concept of assessment evaluation. According to the indications emerging from the European documents, learning outcome certification involves at least two distinct sub-processes: the evaluation of the learning outcomes and their validation. This process is highly technical and is the verification of the possession of learning outcomes. The EQF recommendation does not provide a definition of this concept, probably because the concept of assessment is traditionally used in the learning systems context. However, a specific definition of assessment linked to learning outcomes is provided in the recommendations of the European Parliament and of the Council on the establishment of the European Credit System for Vocational Education and Training. Here, the assessment process is distinct from that of validation and that of recognition. The term assessment is defined as follows: assessment of learning outcomes, methods and processes used to establish the extent to which a learner has in fact attained particular knowledge, skills or competence. The concept of validation. It is the process of confirming that the learning outcomes achieved by the person and verified in the assessment process actually correspond to those required for the issuance of a qualification. The concept of recognition of learning outcomes is related to the concept of validation, and it is understood as the process of attesting officially achieved learning outcomes through the awarding of units or qualifications. From learning outcome centrality to standard centrality. The processes of assessment, validation, and recognition of learning outcomes would not be possible without standards. In European documents, in order to support the process of referencing national qualifications to the EQF, there are 3 types of standards related to qualifications and certification processes. Occupational standards describe the contents of professionalism of the professional, to which a given qualification gives access, usually making clear the activities, the results of these activities, and at times the skills necessary to achieve effective performance. These standards are often defined together with the representatives of the social partners and the business world and reflect the needs of the labor market and more generally of society. Often, these standards are the base from which the other 2 types of standards derive. Assessment standards specify the object of evaluation, the criteria for attributing a value level to the performance of the assessed person. Educational standards define the learning outcomes of learning pathways that lead to a qualification. These standards are of particular interest to the organization of education and training because they form the basis for defining the programs and for choosing the most appropriate strategies and training methods. Ensuring quality in vocational training definitely means promoting the quality of training facilities, personnel, processes of service delivery, but it requires above all the centrality of learning outcomes, some quality assurance standards applied to the construction and management of the skills assessment, validation and recognition processes when acquired by the client system. EQAVET recommendation. The EQAVET recommendation constitutes a significant stepping stone in paving the road towards quality assurance in the education and training in response to the policy goals of the Copenhagen process, which calls for closer cooperation in the field of VET and in ongoing work to renew Europe's education and training systems. The EQAVET recommendation establishes a European quality assurance reference framework as a reference instrument to help member states to promote and monitor continuous improvement of their VET systems based on common European references, which builds on and further develops the framework. The reference framework provides a common framework and tools to member state VET systems and VET providers to improve, monitor and evaluate their quality assurance policies and practices in a manner appropriate to their national or institutional context. European Quality Assurance Framework. According to the report from the Commission to the European Parliament and the Council on the implementation of the recommendation of the European Parliament and of the Council of the 18th of June 2009 on the establishment of a European Quality Assurance Reference Framework for Vocational Education and Training, vocational education and training has a crucial role to play when it comes to supporting the EU competitiveness. The challenges are still significant: increasing VET attractiveness, embedding stronger work-based learning, enhancing labor market relevance, developing stronger career and education guidance, implementing teachers and trainers professionals development, and improving recognition and transparency of VET learning outcomes between countries and across different educational pathways. Quality assurance has an important role in addressing these challenges, in particular overcoming skills mismatches and improving employability of young people so that a shared understanding of VET excellence can finally emerge, facilitating mutual recognition of learning acquired in various countries and thus enabling more mobility and a better response to economic and societal challenges. Framework target. The framework should be applied at the VET system, VET provider and qualification awarding levels. It provides a systemic approach to quality, covering and interrelating to relevant levels and actors. The framework should give strong emphasis to monitoring and improving quality by combining internal and external evaluation, review and processes for improvement supported by measurement and qualitative analysis. It is adaptable to the different national systems and it can be used in accordance with national legislation and practice. The framework should be a basis for further development through cooperation at European, national, regional and local levels. Framework statements. The framework is based on earlier European level work on quality assurance system, and it complements the work on the quality assurance aspects of the European qualifications framework and the European credit system for VET. The framework states the need for regular monitoring and activity reporting on progress. The framework includes the need for regular monitoring involving internal and external evaluation mechanisms and reporting on progress. The framework uses common quality criteria and indicative descriptors to underpin the monitoring and reporting arrangements. And finally, the framework stresses the importance of common indicators to support the evaluation, monitoring and quality assurance of VET systems and providers. Outcomes expected from the Member States. Member States are invited to use and further develop the framework, quality criteria, indicative descriptors and reference indicators. At the same time, they are invited to participate actively in the European Quality Assurance Framework network as a basis for further development of common principles, reference criteria and indicators, guidelines and tools for quality improvement in VET. If it is non-existent, Member States should establish a quality assurance national reference point for VET that is linked to the particular structures and requirements of each Member State, and that in accordance with national practice brings together existing relevant bodies and involves the social partners and all stakeholders concerned at national and regional levels. The effective implementation of the reference framework requires Member States to participate fully in the EQAVET network, its work program, and to support well-functioning quality assurance national reference points. Quality assurance national reference points for VET. The role of the national reference points is to establish connections between the European approach and national assurance frameworks and to be a catalyst for developing a culture of quality assurance in Member States. They provide active support for the implementation of the EQAVET's work program and dissemination of information about the activities of EQAVET in the national context. The reference points support the national process to define an approach to quality assurance, disseminating technical and scientific knowledge, practices and tools to improve quality assurance. In every member country, the national reference point gives access to information on the reference framework and brings together existing relevant bodies involving the social partners and all stakeholders concerned at national and regional levels. The national reference points have expertise and are linked to the particular structures, practices and requirements of each member state. They are part of the EQAVET network and they play a key role in EQAVET. The toolbox. The recommendation considers quality assurance as the management tool to steer modernization and mainstreaming of VET systems, both initial and continuing. The framework does not prescribe a particular quality assurance system or approach, but provides common principles, quality criteria, indicative descriptors and indicators which are to be regarded as a toolbox from which the various users may use those they consider most relevant to the requirements of their particular quality assurance system. EQAVET Quality Cycle. The recommendation invites member states to promote and monitor continuous improvement in their VET systems based on a common framework. This framework is comprised of a quality assurance and improvement cycle of planning, implementation, evaluation and review supported by indicative descriptors and indicators. The selection of quality criteria, descriptors and indicators is applicable to quality management at both VET system and VET provider levels. nor should the indicators be considered as benchmarks, nor as a means of reporting on or drawing comparisons between the quality and efficiency of different national systems. Continuous VET quality assurance and improvement cycle. For each phase, planning, implementation, evaluation, adaptation, quality criteria and indicative descriptors at system level and at provider level are set out. The planning phase is the level where are established clear and measurable goals, objectives, with identified procedures for assessing their achievement. Throughout the implementation phase, basic principles consistent with the actions planned in order to ensure the effectiveness in achieving the objectives are established. During the evaluation and assessment phase, processes are set in motion for assessing inputs, outputs, processes and outcome results, including identification and roles of stakeholders and the approaches to be adopted. In the review phase, there is consideration of how feedback should be organized so that it is systematic, transparent, and related to goals or objectives, but also to the results of the assessment. The involvement of stakeholders is a transversal issue that applies to all 4 phases. EQAVET indicators. The EQAVET indicators are intended to measure a broad range of issues regarding quality assurance and member states and VET providers' response to those issues. The reference indicators proposed are intended to support the evaluation and quality improvement of VET systems and/or providers in accordance with national legislation and practice. However, because the quality assurance in VET covers so many topics, the set of indicators may not comprehensively address all the specific monitoring and evaluation needs of the VET providers in a given country. It is interesting to note that the use of indicators to support and measure the achievement of quality objectives in VET is part of the growing emphasis on outputs and outcomes in education and training. At systems level, indicators provide public authorities with information to inform evidence-based policy making and the allocation of resources. At provider level, indicators provide institutions with feedback on the efficiency and the effectiveness of their provision and assist them in communicating results to a wide range of stakeholders. EQAVET building blocks. The early analysis of approaches to quality assurance by VET providers across Europe, which are in line with the EQAVET framework, has identified 6 interdependent building blocks. These 6 building blocks support and complement each other and build on the EQAVET indicative descriptors and indicators. The building blocks provide guidance by identifying key activities which could be undertaken in order to improve quality assurance processes in line with the EQAVET framework. All of the building blocks are supported by examples from European VET providers. The building blocks set out activities that would help VET providers to develop and support a quality assurance approach in line with the EQAVET framework. They include referring to the EQAVET quality assurance cycle, a call to action, identifying the key issues that should be considered and the factors for success, referring to lessons learned based on an analysis of recent experiences from European VET providers, which suggest new ways forward. Another set of 10 building blocks which offer practical advice on what could be done to develop quality assurance for VET has been developed, referring to VET system. End of Unit 1. European Quality Assurance in Vocational Education and Training and European Quality Assurance Reference Framework. Basic facts.